would you like to hear from staff what kind of the next steps are, what they're working on currently, and how this is moving forward?
Yes, and I believe I'd also like to know further input on the idea of getting a project manager for this.
Yeah, so after our conversation last week where you brought that up, I did have a chance to connect with Ryan and with Heather on that. And given the scope of what the board has approved, which is expanded 7th period options and then looking at a shuttle, they don't feel at this point, we don't feel at this point that we necessarily need a project manager for next fall for 15-16, as long as the scope of what we're looking at doesn't change, but would open the possibility once the task force gets up and running. I think it would be helpful for them to know that the board would be supportive of them procuring a project manager if they felt like that would be helpful for them. So I would like to keep that door open for them. At this point, we don't feel like we need a project manager for what we're looking for next fall.
So the reason I suggested a project manager was the specific information that was coming down that you could choose 2 through 7 unless you wanted to be in sports at 2 of our high schools. Of course, Inglemoor is already offering sports 30 minutes later. And so my suggestion for a project manager was based on if we can't see how to move sports 30 minutes for the other 2 high schools, perhaps we needed the extra hands on deck, because I was hearing from both board members and staff that, well, we're really busy and it's a whole lot of work. So that was specifically my concern about having a project manager on it for next year.
Well, I think I'll let you address sort of how each building is sort of taking that one on. You are correct, Inglemoor's got a little bit longer history with more expansive 7th period offerings, so they figured out more of the athletic pieces, and I think some of our other schools are a little later to that game, but I think they're working on it.
They are working on it, and it does vary by sport and by season. For example, cross country in the fall, they have limited daylight once we hit the October month, and so they need to begin their practices after school. And I know that many of the coaches do allow the students who are in 7th period at Inglemoor to come later to that practice, so we would try to replicate that for our Bothell and our Woodinville athletes. Same in the spring, we have limited times for golf course, so some of those times that we can get on the golf course are directed by Wayne Golf Course, so we can only accommodate the times that they give us. So it's not, you can't just say to every sports team or every coach you need to start after 7th period, but I do know that the coaches at Inglemoor have been flexible. Some students have been able to come late to practice, some students come after 7th period, and then some students do just choose that they aren't participants in athletics, so that's not an issue for them. So we are working through it. I have a high school principals meeting on Thursday morning, so it's a topic for discussion.
Will we be able to offer comparable programs at all 3 high schools then? In terms of sports? In terms of how we service our students in sports? Will it look the same? Are we hoping for that out of Thursday's meeting?
We're hoping that it will be similar. Again, this is newer for Bothell and Woodinville, so it takes some time to adjust and to get the coaches on board and to understand some of the barriers they may have at those schools that we may not know yet. Inglemoor's been doing this for a very long time, so and I'm sure the first couple of years it wasn't clean and easy for them as well, but we are working towards making sure students have opportunities to participate.
So are we still giving the message that if you're participating in sports, you can't choose a later start time schedule?
I don't think that we're directly giving that message. I can certainly affirm that there are some coaches that would say to an athlete, it would be best if you were in a 1 through 6 period schedule, because we need you directly after school to be able to travel with the team, to get on the golf course, or to go to the pool to swim. Or there's sports that require a different level of participation because it's not on the school site. So I do know that that is happening. I don't think if they say, well, no, I need to take 7th period, how can we make that work, then negotiation occurs.
Heather, are there any other significant issues that you're butting up against that you're finding that you need to work through to make it work for as many students as possible? Just curious.
We're meeting Thursday morning, and so that's the first time I've had the opportunity to get the high school principals together to look at some of those barriers or consequences at some of the other schools. Vicki Sherwood was out of town. We've got her back now, so we can utilize her as a resource. So we'll be able to really dig in on Thursday morning. We just haven't had the opportunity to get together and to analyze some of those concerns. And we don't have the numbers yet either. We have some very rough numbers, but nothing firm.
What are your rough numbers showing? Okay, very ballpark, is it?
So Vicki Sherwood sent me an email from Inglemore's numbers for juniors and seniors next year, so we don't have the incoming sophomore class yet. But there were 288 students who chose a 1 through 7 because they were really excited about the expanded options.
And there are many times
and the opportunities. And there were 39 students who chose a 2 through 7 option.
There were 39?
39.
And that's without your sophomore?
That's without the incoming sophomore class.
Heather, as you're working through these, will you kind of let Larry know so that we can
Sure.
keep the board informed? Because we hear in the community, like Donna was saying, things that are barriers or perceived barriers, and we like to know what's happening. We are in expectation that this will be implemented with as much flexibility as possible for students.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, and we did have a discussion at Cabinet about data to be gathered along the way to help inform the process, and it's on our next Cabinet agenda as well to revisit that conversation. And with respect to, I think, the question that was specifically asked of the Woodville High School principal, it was asked, in fairness to him, it was asked within about a day or two of the board having taken action on the 2 through 7, and I think Kurt was caught a little flat-footed as to how to answer the question, so answered it at this time, here's what I'm thinking, without having had the, a very thorough opportunity to kind of process through all the possibilities that may be there to be more flexible.
Conversely, this is my opinion, the board will have to weigh in on it, but I would have a serious problem with students taking seventh period and then not getting to class the entire quarter because they're participating in a sport that would take them out of it. So there's that balance too, from my perspective.
And I would also, 2 through 7, if kids are being told or under the belief, and I hear what you're saying that he didn't know, that they cannot do periods 2 through 7, and then they choose 1 through 6, but they really would have chose 2 through 7. I want to make sure, or I would hope that the data that we're getting reflects what kids would choose versus, does that make sense? Versus,
So I think students went through the registration process absent any information or communication about what sports or athletics impact may be. So I think there was my understanding is a pretty pure choice that they were making when they were doing their registrations.
they knew they could choose a 2 through 7.
Yes.
Yes.
The questions came up sort of after the fact of registration.
So all that been turned in at all the high schools then? They had deadlines for this, so the confusion around it was not well timed, considering their deadlines.
Correct.
Yeah, the decision made here the next day was it was like 2 days later that the registration forms had to be turned in, so there wasn't even a legitimate amount of time to turn that to get clear information out. So we recognize we may have to go back out and do additional communication, so that's one of the things we'll be discussing on Thursday.
So,
We had to do, if you remember, we had to do a similar process last year when the addition of some additional staffing for schools for 7th period options came well after the registration process, so we had to circle back again and do some communicating. We'll likely have to do something similar this time around.
are we thinking to offer more than one FTE at the high schools then for a 7th period? Have we considered that? Or is that going to be part of the discussion Thursday?
We're hoping, our plan is to add one FTE
Right.
to the one that was already there. So each school would
Right.
have at least 2 FTE available for 7th period offerings, again, depending on what their demand may be. We're hoping that demand will be sufficient for all of that FTE, but we're going to have to see sort of what student choices have been.
If demand is sufficient for more than that FTE is what I was asking, is if you do have enough people wanting to take 7th period, are we thinking about expanding that FTE?
We haven't talked about that. I think that probably the first place we would look is within or across the staffing of our high schools. If we have some schools that have less demand and some that have more, the first place we would probably be wanting to shift some of that allocation from buildings with less demand to buildings with more demand.
So do we have enough coverage for all that additional demand at Inglemoor? It sounded like a pretty high, what did you say?
Well, it's 288 students who have selected they'd like to have that schedule. It doesn't mean that all 288 will be able to fit those 7th period options into that
Because it's lower
schedule.
than 200 right now at Inglemoor.
Yeah, it's
that has 1 through 7.
75.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought, right? So it's
Because we have to
other-
have match with teacher, so we have
Right.
teachers to teach it, and we have a core group of students who have selected the same number of classes that we can offer 7th period. So it doesn't mean that every student that chooses that will actually get to have that 7th period class.
Got it.
We do our best to try to
So we have to see
figure
those
that
shifts.
out, but it's a process, and you have to take student needs, teacher needs, and what teachers, who wants to be on a 2 through 7 schedule, and then match that up.
Right.
So it is a complex process. Principals are good at it.
Thank you.
Is there more that we're receiving a report on operationalizing this? Is there more?
No,
What-
unless board members had questions.
Yep. And I would just say from the other aspect of it is I think transportation is ready to go with, they're programming in the shuttles per the maps that we saw. The specific stops will be fine-tuned once it's actually known who the specific students are who are going to be accessing the shuttles. So the stops that were noted in the maps are subject to change based on who actually rides the shuttle. Anything else, Ryan, on that? No? Got it pretty well?
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is also board reports and communications, discussion about accommodating the special needs populations and the later high school start time discussion. There was a legal opinion by Buzz in the 313 briefing that hopefully board members had a chance to review. And then if Becky is available to give us kind of an overview, or Larry, or someone, just kind of how it's kind of a mini lesson of how special needs and transportation and some of the.
So I'll give a quick overview and then Becky can chime in when I start going off the rails here. But in general, the summary of just to summarize what I already shared with you from Buzzport's legal analysis, 7th period offerings are open to all students, including special needs students. In the same manner they are to general ed students. So if the offerings fit the need of a special needs student, that student has equal access to that course as would any other student. With respect to transportation, if a student in 2 through 7 is eligible or is capable of riding the shuttle, they'd have the same access to the shuttle as any student. If a special needs student needed specific transportation accommodations, we will need to figure out what those would look like for that student, but we would be obligated to provide them because they have equal access to the courses. There's not a mandate or a requirement that we would offer specific courses to meet the needs of special needs students, but again, if through the process that Heather just described, courses are offered that fit the needs of those students, they can enroll with them just like any other student with equal access to transportation. Is that right?
Did you have other questions you asked for this?
Was there
agenda item?
additional information from special ed on this topic? I know I asked.
Yep.
How many current students?
Yes,
You
you
do
did.
have additional information? Okay.
So the question that you had asked is how many high school students now currently arrive later than first period? So have an altered schedule where they arrive later in the day. And the answer to that is across all 3 of our comprehensive high schools, 18 students.
18 students have opted out of first period,
18 students do not have a first period, correct?
and that's reflected in their IEPs
Correct.
as an adjustment. I'm sorry, she's,
Well,
For some it would be,
yeah, I was gonna say, oh,
yeah.
it's good to be back. Some students come even later than first period, and that is IEP determined. So some students are, because of, they're maybe transitioning back into school, and their health concerns are such that the doctor wants them on a reduced schedule. And some of them have special transportation as a result of that, and others, they transport themselves. So it's a combination. Some of these students, and we actually looked at it whether they were LC. We have 3 levels of students that we serve by program. You may be familiar with this, but we have learning center students whose program is pretty much the same as any student, but then they get maybe a period or so of a special ed support. Then we have what they call mid-level students, which are students who have more, a little greater need, and so they might be a little bit more in special ed and a little bit less in general ed. And then we have our functional skills and academic students who have pretty impacted needs, so they might have a whole lot of special education support and related services and all of that that comes with that. So as we look at the breakdown by those program services, the largest, well, not the largest group, but we have mid-level students that fall into that and LC students. We just had a few of the FSA students that fall into that later start type of arena, so just looking at the breakdown. And the reason I bring that up is an LC student, just like any general education student might not have a first period, it'd be the same for them. But the IEP should reflect that the student is not coming full-time. Does that answer your question? So it wasn't an IEP necessarily an IEP team's decision for that student. The student made the choice of not wanting to have a first period for
and that
whatever
would be
reason.
under the LC
And then they,
population would be in that.
yeah, and so then typically they should go back and revise the IEP to show on the minutes that they're not coming that first period. But it wasn't an IEP team decision for that student to not have the first period. They maybe didn't like their elective, or they didn't, I mean, I don't know what the reasons are for it, but that would fall more under the LC, yes. Does that help? A little bit?
Yes, but essentially then, we are giving less service, and through our 3 comprehensive high schools, at least there, to 18 special needs students total, correct?
They're
And-
pretty reduced schedules.
And some of those have reduced schedules because, and I believe that I've been contacted by a number of parents who have said that their children cannot handle that first period, and they've had to request the second period start. But I've also been contacted by people that would like a full day of instruction, but it's kind of denied them because there's nothing in 7th period for them then. Now, an LC student would be able to access a 7th period class if it was offered. I mean, if it was something they needed and it was offered, correct?
As I look at this list, this breakdown, as I look at more of our mid-level and FSA students, the ones that are on this list actually come like 3 periods later. Their needs are such that they're not even coming till 3rd or 4th period of their day. So it's more than just a first period being late because of medical reasons or whatever.
And so do those students have a 7th period available to them so that they could at least, I mean,
Not at this time, no. They don't have a 7th period.
okay, and neither do the FSA students, correct?
No student has.
There's no programming for those students.
Right. We haven't had a 7th period before, except at Inglemoor, and
We had them last year, I wouldn't go back
So-
then. So we just haven't moved our special ed students into the,
Well, the dynamic is a little bit different for our FSA because we don't have a lot of different teachers that can do the different options. You know, when you have a special education program, you have X number of teachers to serve the students. And so you have, first of all, I appreciate you asking and advocating on behalf of special needs students. Let me say that, okay? It's
You
more,
too.
it's more complicated than just making that switch. We would have to look at a lot of different factors around how those students are included in the other part of their day and what options of programming there is. We have related service staff that have to serve, you know, and they're itinerant, so they serve multiple sites in multiple schools. So it's a bigger picture that we need to look at to see if something like that could be made an option or a choice. But I do appreciate you asking the question.
So I have a question with regards to inequity issues in our special needs population in terms of transportation. I am being contacted by parents who kiddos are going to want or need 7 periods in their special needs students. They have an IEP or a 504 plan, and they're going to want to take 1 through 7 so that they can
Okay.
graduate on time. Are we going to run into issues because we have prioritized access to transportation to the 2 through 7?
How to answer that, to be honest.
Possibly.
Okay.
Possibly. It's not a question I've asked directly, but sort of intuitively. It could be a possibility. How I've answered the question, I've been asked it once directly, which is the shuttles were specifically approved. The board's approval was to allow students to take a 2 through 7 schedule. So obviously if a student's attending 1 through 7, they have an assurance of morning transportation, for sure. And they would be the next tier if there is room in the afternoon shuttle. I don't know why we wouldn't put them on that shuttle. But the specific approval was for students who were taking a 2 through 7 schedule.
So if there is room, which we're not guaranteed, of course, because it may be ending up that popular, but if there is room, students choosing a 1 through 7 schedule would be allowed on this.
Sure, if there was room, if there was
shuttles.
room on the bus, there's no reason why we wouldn't put them on there. I've been asked the same question about student athletes, you know, essentially using the shuttle as a activity bus for, you know, and I don't think the timing is going to work out right with when most practices end and when the bus would actually be running for the 2 through 7 shuttle. But certainly if the times did align and there was room on the bus, why would we not allow that to happen? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's not what we said at the last one, so.
Excuse me?
It was a different message at the last one, so it was that only the kids who signed up to take 2 through 7 were allowed on those buses.
Yeah.
That's where the question came
Well,
from.
I think
So if we're flexible, then I think that's a much better stand to have.
there's the component of this being a different type of bus service, though. We're not just dropping them at, you know, the scheduled places. It's more of a regional service, so I don't know how the extra students would fit into that either.
It's like
Not
our-
special, I think, but-
it's like our activity buses and our other
Correct.
programs, so. I guess I feel like we say that it's different, but yet we're doing this, so it's different because it's not regular. So I know probably special needs students have the third group, the functional, they do need door-to-door service.
They have different, usually a different.
So our mid-level, do they need door-to-door service or can they run overall on a,
It's a mix with those
Mix.
particular students, you know,
But the
as long as
LC
it's not a safety issue. LC students would be fine.
could go on
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
regional?
Absolutely.
So do we know how many special needs students or students with IEPs have applied to be running that 2 through 7 shift?
I do not.
You don't have that information?
Not at this time, no. It's not the same.
Have to monitor that.
Okay. So I was contacted by quite a few parents that were concerned about this and, you know, practically in tears just with the thought that their children would not have to continue getting up. I hate it that my name is involved in the crack of dawn, but, you know, getting up so early is so hard on them. So, I am advocating for this.
I understand. I understand.
And I also heard that there were special needs teachers that were willing to work a 2 through 7 shift, but were told they couldn't.
I have no knowledge of that, so.
So and of course, I have no idea where that would have come from. If it wasn't you, then building or what that was about. But would we be open to that kind of a class for special needs kids? Because we're already running the buses, and if a teacher was saying, I have a self-contained classroom, I'm willing to work that shift, would we be able to make that shift?
Before I could even go there, I'd
You have to
do
find
some-
out who it was
Well,
and what
I
it
would do some
was.
research because
Right.
it's greater than, it impacts more than just that teacher in that classroom.
Right,
Back
no, I
to
hear
service, yeah, so it's a much.
PTs, OTs, everybody else,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, and
get it.
they are spread all over the place, so, I know, I guess what I have to sort through is, you know, the whole 7th period is a choice, it's an option, and, you know, how we can make an option work for more kids is a cool thing, but at the same time, they're entitled to a 6-period day, you know, it's not, this addition is an additional above and beyond, so it's trying to shift that. I just don't know. I mean, I think it's hard for me to say, yeah, great, let's go forth and do it until we have more information. I'm struggling with it because it impacts so many other things. It could impact IEP meetings, it could impact those students being integrated into regular classrooms because the options at 7th period are going to be more limited, I think. I don't know, because we won't have the full range of, you know, like a lot of times they're in elective classes for their integration time, and we might not have that opportunity for them. Now, whether that could all be done in 2 through 6, I mean, those are all things that I can't answer for you right now.
So Becky, can I just ask step back and take a little bit broader look at it? The board has the resolution that says that we want to no later than 8 o'clock start time in 2017. So does the special needs, special services department, are you beginning the conversation of how that will be operationalized for special needs students as well? I mean, is there
Everybody moves back,
Yeah.
it'll just fit in like everything else. So it'll just be the way it's run, so that won't be really an impact. It'll just be a later start time.
Which was my idea, why not just
I'm going to go sit down now.
I would like to have some more conversation about how we're moving forward on that, whether that's a priority. I know that the board has talked about things, but I think that it's just not fair to our special needs students. If it can't be done in 2015, and I haven't given up hope on that at all, then I think it should be a huge priority for the following year. And I think it ought to be prioritized by the task force.
So I'm not opposed to the concept. What I am struggling with is the process that we have started to use. It's a very adversarial process that we use with our later high school start time conversation. We pitted our elementary parents against our high school parents. We pitted our junior high parents against our high school parents. We pitted our music families against our non-music families. And I do not want to do that to our special needs families. I don't want to be in a situation where we're having to listen to elementary school special needs parents in here having to advocate for their kids. I don't want to be in a situation where we have special needs students that are participating in music, they're participating in athletics, and I'm hearing from the families that they're going to be participating in 1 through 7. And I don't want them having to advocate or argue or be sitting here in a room where there is this animosity against each other. So I'm not opposed to the concept or that being accessible, but I want us to have this discussion in a consensus building way. So however that looks, but I will not participate in another discussion where we're pitting one special needs child against another.
So what do you mean you won't participate?
I can't do that again. That was too awful. To have our parents that they have elementary school kids come in and beg us not to move the system back. I don't want to be in a situation where our music families are having to come in and beg us not to eliminate a program, because there's so much misinformation and miscommunication, and it creating this, it's us versus them. So if we're going to do this, we need to have it be a conversation where we're looking at the big picture, we understand how the process works before we go down this road. We have a whole lot more information about the laws and the requirements and the way it looks now, and that when we have this conversation, it isn't that we understand that our special needs population is not just high school students just needing a 2 through 7. That yes, there are those, but there are some that need 1 through 7. There are those that need music. There are those that need access to participating in athletics. And we have to make sure that this conversation incorporates all of their needs.
I'm confused. But I mean, I think that when we have this, I sat out here before I was a board member, and there were many conversations that appeared adversarial because they're discussions, and that's part of the public forum. So I don't want to discount what you're saying. I'm just at the same time, I mean, I think that for me, that's part of the process is, you know, having discussions. I hope that there's not misinformation as much as we can, as much as any of us can help to give information that is accurate. But I don't know how we conduct a meeting without a lot of times putting all the information on the table, just like we did with Later Start. I mean,
I think what I'm hearing Sandy say is that the condensed process that we were in for the Later Start discussion made it adversarial, not amongst us, but amongst community groups that were advocating for one thing versus another. And she's advocating for a process that allows us to address all of it in total instead of a separate silo addressing of the issues. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I've been on this board quite some time and have never been in a situation where it felt that, where we were pitting families against families in the community.
who was pitting them against each other?
When we would say things like, let's flip junior high and high school, we were pitting our junior high and high school parents against each
Or
other.
were we having a conversation?
Well, but we proposed it, and that, I'm not saying us were adversary, I'm saying then in the community, junior high parents were saying, we are being sacrificed for the needs of the high school students. When we were proposing shifting the whole system back, the elementary parents, not because of what we were saying, but when that's out there on the agenda, they see you are negatively impacting us, and we now have to write emails that come in and say, don't do this to our kids. And that's what I'm getting at, is that before we go down this road, let's make sure we understand. We spent 4 months saying up here on the dais that we were not going to negatively impact our music program, but in the very last meeting where we had proposed one of the options, flipping junior high and high school start times, we did not have the information to understand how our music program worked. And once we understood it, then we recognized that that was going to negatively impact it. But our music parents didn't understand that we didn't know that. So what they saw was us proposing a solution to getting the high school students to a later high school start time that was going to negatively impact the music program. So those are just examples of what we went through. And so what I'm saying is not against the concept. I want to be really clear. Not against having a conversation, but we've got to be much more careful that we have a conversation that doesn't appear to be pitting groups of parents and families and community members against others.
Well, that's, yeah, I have a very different view on it, and I think I've heard from parents that are very appreciative that we're actually having these above board, honest, transparent conversations. So we're probably both hearing from different people in the community, and they're probably both valid.
I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think what Sandy is advocating for is let's take time and know about what we're talking about before we're talking about it, for one thing. And have a process that allows us to really you said it better, because I can't even think of what I'm saying, but having a process in place that is thoughtful and deliberate and includes all of the conversation that we participated in as a later start conversation, because I think that was really, as I said in the memo, I think that was really healthy and productive conversation. But we just want to have time to address things thoughtfully and not in a condensed process.
So we have a resolution 2 through 7, I mean a resolution, we have a action that we're doing 2 through 7. We have a task force, and all I hear that was being put out here today is how do we make it equitable for the special needs students that would like to access that shuttle service 2 through 7. And what I heard, summarizing, was that the LC students have that option and probably have the most access to that option because they would have classes that they probably can. We're going to be offering classes that they most likely could take potentially. So, and then I've heard that the mid-range and the functional students that this next year is not an option at this point, and that there's not a move to there's not a move by the board to at this point make that an option and to allow the task force to do that work for 2016 or 2017. That's what I'm hearing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, I heard Dawn saying that she wanted to see a 2 through 7 and hadn't given up hope for 2015.
Correct.
And I think that's what
correct.
triggered what Sandy is saying, that we just need to be thoughtful about this.
And,
Yes,
and
I
I
did hear Dawn say
also
that.
heard that we are going to continue the priority for buses for 2 through 7, but not for special needs 1 through 7. So that's what I'm getting at when I'm talking about we are continuing this adversarial. We're pitting 2 through 7 special needs against 1 through 7 special needs access to transportation. And that's where my concern is that we keep going down this road. So I want us to step back and just be aware.
Is it the LC that could take 1 through 7? Because the other two groups can't take 1 through 7, correct? Mid and functional need. Is that what I heard?
Mid-level potentially could, because some of those students, many of those
I'm
students
just trying to understand which
are
group we're talking.
many of those students access general ed courses, so potentially they could. It's
Go
probably a
while they 1 through
little
7.
bit more remote for FSA students that have a much more constricted schedule and course offerings.
Am I using the correct language when I'm asking that? Am I using the correct language when I'm asking that question? There's LC, mid, and
Level FSA.
FSA, and I'm categorized, I mean,
They have greater needs.
okay. I just want to make sure I'm using the correct language.
I just heard advocating for special needs population, and to me, that's all kids that are on the 504 IEP plan.
So again, if there were an LC or a mid-level student or an FSA student, any special needs student with a 504 who was appropriate for a 7th period course, but for whatever reason the shuttle wasn't an appropriate mode of transportation for that student, we will, as we do now with special needs students, we will need to arrange appropriate transportation for that student.
For the, I'm sorry, for the mid-level?
For any student, special ed or 504, who would need special transportation arrangements, who would
That
be
wouldn't ride the
appropriate
regular
for,
bus.
that would be appropriate for a 7th period course that's offered.
This is exactly what I'm being at. We need way more information before we can go down down this road. There's so much understanding that we
I'm
don't
just
have.
trying to clarify
That's
so
what
I
I'm getting at.
understand.
That's what I'm getting at, that before we weigh in, we need to have a better understanding of how the system currently works, what the laws are.
So I haven't weighed in today, I've just been asking questions, so.
But that's
I'm
an
asking the question
excellent,
because this is the appropriate.
right, that's an excellent example of what I'm getting at, that we need to make sure that we have a better understanding before we use this process again.
I just feel like,
And,
well, we can talk offline.
and I'm not sure, just hearing Larry, I'm not sure the task force will be doing the special ed piece of it because of the laws and everything else that's involved in that, but I guess what I would want to know if we're connecting the special services department with the task force work, so
We
that's.
have people on the task.
Yeah, well, I think they can help inform the work, but it's going to be difficult for the task force that's going to be looking at system-wide solutions or systemic solutions to address individual IEP needs. I mean, those will still be resolved with the IEP team specific to the needs of individual students. That will not be task force level work, nor would the task force be dictating terms that the IEP teams would be obligated to follow. The IEP teams will be focused on the needs of specific students, not on sort of system rules. And that's the way the system works right now and will continue to work.
Do board members have any other questions before we leave this agenda item?
I just think anytime a decision is made, like the early release or the boundaries, as we've had these town halls and we've heard parents that are unhappy, I know it can feel for me and for many of us that it's uncomfortable. I think anytime we make a decision that there's going to be people that are going to come forward, like the parents that were advocating for the Hispanic group, and we did do a thoughtful process, and I'm not minimizing the thoughtful process, but those people came up and, you know, I definitely felt uncomfortable that there was one group that might be disenfranchised because of our boundaries, which I know we're looking at. So I'm just aware that anytime we make decisions, we oftentimes are going to have people in here that are not happy with those decisions, and that's why we're here. I feel I'm here to listen to those different groups, and that's my role. And I personally was happy the music people came in, and not necessarily happy that there wasn't an understanding, but happy that their voices were being heard and that they had the opportunity to say what was important to them. So.
And I think I understand all of the things that Director Hayes was trying to get at there with the heartfelt plea to stop doing whatever it is that we're doing that might in some way cause people to pit themselves against one another. But in the course of this conversation, we passed a resolution that said we would look at 2015, 2016, 2017. We've set up a task force that will be looking at 2016 and 2017. What we could come to a majority on with this board is a shuttle option that does not meet the needs of some of our most fragile students. And some of the comments that I have heard are pitiful about that particular issue for our special needs students. I don't think it's right at all to say, well, this is what you've got, and if your kid doesn't fit on that because they need a special shuttle, tough. I don't see anything wrong with having a conversation about meeting the needs of our special needs students at an appropriate time of the day that would be more beneficial for them. I think that's all we were doing. I certainly would hope that the board would support me in starting special needs students later, because we certainly voted unanimously on a resolution saying that all students should start later. And I'd like to continue the conversation somewhere and know that someone is advocating for those special needs students. And if I don't feel like that's being done, I'll do it. I'll do it from here.
not what I said.
So my question remains still about 2015. I'm hopeful. Okay? And in 2016, I would think that the task force would be looking at, if we're going to make further changes, that we're thinking of our special needs students in those changes.
Yes, all of, is
Yep.
all I'm asking, is all of them.
I didn't say part of them.
You did when you excluded the 1 through 7.
I haven't excluded 1 through 7. My statement all along was that we should be servicing our kids 1 through 7 periods, all of them, and providing that transportation. And it ought to be later.
All right, I'm gonna close this conversation unless there's additional input on it.
Are we, so back to what my clarification before, LC will have the option, I'm just trying to understand where we're ending. And then I think that makes it clear to the community, where are we, and then it will help misinformation to not get out there.
So
With special ed, we are,
So we will be increasing our 7th period options. What we offer 7th period is being driven by student demand, not by whether students are special need or not special need. If, based on what we offer 7th period, any and all students whose schedule and schedule needs fits those courses have equal opportunity to take those courses. If for whatever reason a particular student with a disability wouldn't be appropriate for the 2 through 7 shuttle, we will have to arrange other transportation for those students. So we're not the driver for what our expanded 7th period offerings aren't going to be anything other than student demand and how we can match that up with teachers who can teach to that demand. Not going to be based on trying to selectively pick courses that do or don't meet the needs of disabled students.
but the functional needs students will not have the option of 7th period, only because their teachers, as I heard Becky say.
Unless it's in their
I'm
IEP.
clarifying, that's what I'm not saying.
Unless it's in their IEP. Is that-
The needs of any special education students are still going to be, their main program drivers are still going to be their IEP and their IEP team.
So if a doctor were to say that if I had a child that was the FSA, and if my doctor were to say, my child needs to go on a longer day than this district accommodates that? Now that we're offering it to other students?
That's a complex question.
Okay.
There's not a straightforward yes or no answer to that.
And what I also heard was board desire to have special needs considered as a component of the 2016 plan as well as the 2017 plan to make sure that we're looking at all students. Is that correct? Correct. All right. Next item on the agenda is future agenda items.
I have 2 things. One, I had the opportunity to attend a presentation by a principal about the Smarter Balance testing and what it was looking like for that school, the time period, and what that all meant. And it was enormous value in terms of information and understanding and the changes and what it was looking like. And I've certainly heard from other board members trying to wrap our heads around it. So is there some way we could get either board briefing, just here's the timeline of what Smarter Balance is looking like at the different levels. Here's how, the computers, how it's working, some of the potential concerns. It's a big stressor not only for our schools but our families as well. So just so that we can understand what it's looking like and what that's going to mean.
That was Amy's request as well.
Yes. So we had talked about that, but when the request came, we hadn't started administering Smarter Balance tests yet, so we really didn't. The way I was interpreting the question is sort of how is the testing going? And we hadn't started the testing yet, so we really didn't have an answer to that. So it's sitting
Okay.
in my office to respond to.
Is it more about communication around what to expect from Smarter Balance, or?
Yeah, for me, it was an eye-opener that it was going to take the entire month of May. It's helpful for me to understand that our third graders need to start before spring break so that we can get the conferences in. Just some of those changes, the differences, some of those tests to previous tests.
If I can add on, the fact that it's, I've heard some discussion that it's a stressor on buildings because the need for everything to be online and how the timing of the testing seems to be different than the NSD, and it's added some stress to the logistics of the buildings as well, and seeing how, if they need any additional support in order to get that done.
Yeah, we've provided some additional temporary staffing resources to our schools to assist through the process.
And then the second one, following I brought this up, and I really would like us to spend some time thinking about it, but I brought it up when we were at Crystal Springs. We're going to have a couple of years where our main data source at our school visits is not going to be valid data, at least for a year or two. Well, most of what we look at is student testing data.
Comparison data.
Yeah, the comparison data. And so as we, I hope, we can want to continue those for the next 2 years. And so we're not wasting our time, wasting staff's time, where we're looking at a chart with one data point on it, and it's a number, and it's lower than what it's been, and we're saying, oh, what are you doing about it? And we know they're working very hard. What I'm hoping is that the board will spend the next several weeks really thinking about what is relevant and useful data that we can look at these school visits over the next year or two until we've got kind of a consistent data stream that's of value, so that we are getting consistent and I don't want to say equitable, but the same type of data from school to school that makes it relevant and meaningful. So I don't expect anybody to come up with answers right now, but perhaps when we come back in April. So then staff and Brandon and schools will have time to come back and say, here's how we think we can come up with that kind of data, or that's not something we can really.
So can I make a recommendation? Sorry, Donna.
Well, I believe that conversation we had already, and the answer was that we were taking IRRs, and those wouldn't be changing, and that we had some math tests that we were administering that would be the same. So what other answer was there?
Well, we still have secondary schools that don't do IRRs.
Okay.
So we could use some data there. And I don't know that we specifically directed the district towards that's the type of data that we'd like to be looking at. So that's great.
Oh.
That's a great suggestion. And
Oh, that's what I thought the superintendent answered, so.
So can I just make the recommendation that the next few school visits that we go to, if you just kind of think about what data is really important to you and essential to your understanding for our school visits, and then we can report out on that and build future school visits based on the data that we are looking for. Does that make sense?
okay.
All right. Anybody else?
And pardon me if I didn't see this in the board briefing because we were out of town, so I might have missed it, but I had asked, I think that you were going to talk to the natural leaders and see about the possibility of us having a conversations with the board and what that might look like, or could you?
Right, and I've had a couple of email exchanges with them, and looping Leanna in because she's the one that works the magic behind all of our outreach events, and there's interest in the natural leaders in having something like that. And as I was talking to Leanna about it, there's also, we're looking at the bigger context. Who aren't we reaching? What languages are what other languages, the families are we not? So I think we're talking about a little bit broader. So I haven't forgotten. We're still working on that, and can I can we flesh that out a little bit and then get back to you on that?
Yeah, and that's great. I just wanted to make sure that I loop back around because it's getting later in the year, and I'm hoping that there's a possibility that we might be able to have at least one of those. But I appreciate that, because that has actually been in the back of, not the back of my head, but it's been on my shoulders thinking about that there's many, my neighborhood is primarily Indian.
Right.
So, because I live next to the Hindu, next to the Hindu temple. So I don't want to isolate any minority majority group. I think that the Hispanic population probably has more of a voice because of the natural leader sometimes, so I tend to take notice to that. So I appreciate that you guys are having that conversation, and that would be great to have that information so we can reach as many people as possible in whatever format. And then for next year, that gives us planning for next year for the communities that we can't reach. And then the other kind of wild idea I had was I was thinking, and you guys might have done this in the past, but it struck me that I would like to do like a board exchange, like a student exchange, and be able to go to learn what other school boards, and I know you guys had the discussion of being able to talk to different people at Lake Washington and Bellevue over the years, and Larry, you seem to know oftentimes what's going on in different school districts. But I thought it might be nice to, I don't know, have like a day, a student exchange day where we go and kind of just learn their process. Have them visit us go visit them, be in one of their meetings, and I think there might be some value even back to what you're saying, Sandy, is just, how sometimes are these discussions in other contexts, in other boards, Seattle, Lake Washington, and I just think there's some value with that dialogue. So I want to put that out there for a future agenda item. It didn't mean the whole board had to go. Maybe we have representatives.
No, we're free to just do that.
I know we are, but I didn't know if we
I've done
wanted.
it before.
And I want to do them. I've had discussions with several people at Seattle, but then I was like, maybe it would be more appropriate, because I know I've had some people ask me questions about our later start because they're in the process of that, and then I'm like, maybe it'd be nice if we did that together and then we're having more of a dialogue, or maybe we just went two at a time. So, I don't know, I thought maybe we could have a discussion about that.
Yeah, we have done that in the past where we've intentionally gone out to other districts and looked at what their processes are. It's very educational. It's really, I agree, it's really good to get outside of our little neighborhood and see what's being done in other places. There's, if you're asking for a formal way to do it, or if you just want to informally check out other boards that don't have meetings on the same nights that we do. And
I thought I'd like to have, I just thought it would be a good discussion. So I have no problem going to another board meeting. Then I'm kind of like, well, if I'm going to have these conversations, maybe it'd be nice to have somebody else, and maybe we could just make an arrangement to have an exchange. Anyway, it's my wild idea that we could talk about. That's why I want to put it as a discussion or a,
so you want
if no one's interested, then, or
you want
not
to just
interested.
do it, or you want it as a discussion item to figure out how to do it?
Yeah, a discussion if anyone's interested in it.
Does that make sense to board members? Is that okay?
Maybe two of us just go, so it's not a formal.
Any others?
Larry, you could be a soup for a day. I don't know.
Pardon me?
Just trying to be funny.
I spent
Exchange of a
plenty of
soup for a
time
day.
with my superintendent colleagues, thank you very much.
Actually, one of the district principals and I have long discussed trading places and experiencing that. So I'd just like to, policy 1331 is the one about the audit officer for the board, which is me. And we received a letter. I did, President Quinn, Vice President Cass was also CC'd on that. And I'm assuming superintendent as well. And Julie got that?
Are you talking about the email?
An email, yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, you did, but you maybe don't know it yet. Anyhow, it led me to, well, Well, think about the audit officer for the board, which is me this year. And I liked a thought that occurred to me that I would like to meet with the state auditor and see what the state auditor does in terms of warrants, which is my job on the board, and talk